Okay, I have been working in comics professionally for 8 years. I actually studied it in school, and I was a teacher at the time, and just through a funny confluence of events, I ended up landing a job at Marvel Comics. And since then, I've kind of worked my way up the ladder, and I'm now a full editor in the X-Men office. And when you think about being an editor, you think, okay, I'm gonna sit quietly at a desk, and I'm gonna read scripts, and I'm gonna send notes off to writers and artists. And instead, you end up being sent overseas to comic conventions where you're thrust in front of a room full of people, and you need to be informative and funny and entertaining, all when you don't speak the language and there's a translator whispering in your ear the entire time. So it ends up being this kind of weird mix of skill sets that are all of a sudden meeting. You think they really never should, but they do. At this point, I've gone to 3 shows in Spain. I was just invited back, actually, to go to Madrid again, which my piece in the book is about my first trip to the Madrid Comic Convention. And I've been to Italy earlier this year, and I've done a number of shows in the United States.
Mm-hmm. And which country would you say comics are the most popular, or is it worldwide?
Well, it's funny. In that sense, the world, comics have a very different history outside the United States. They reach so far back, and they're so much more diverse in their offerings. I mean, in Japan, there are cooking comics, and there's like tennis comics, and there are comics about ladies going shopping. There's everything, Whereas in the United States, I think that up until very recently, it was just thought, oh, it's superheroes, it's flights and tights. I think just now we're starting to enjoy some of that diversity, because I think that we're learning that there are lots of different kinds of audiences for comics and lots of different kinds of people that want to tell their stories in this medium.
Mm-hmm. So what inspired you to get involved in comics and be so passionate about it?
Oh my goodness. I have just always loved the intersection of pictures and words from a very, very young age. Cartoons, picture books, I devoured as a kid. And there was a point at which when I was really little, when I tell people that I work in comics, everyone assumes that I'm an artist, because when I was a kid, I would always be drawing with magic markers, and my mother would say the only time she could ever see my actual fingers underneath all the ink was when I was sick and too sick to pick up a pen, because I was always drawing. And at a point, when you're a 3rd grade boy, and you're watching the X-Men cartoon on TV or Batman, you're like, man, I really want to draw me some Batman. And that's just sort of where it started. And eventually, I started drawing my own comics. I think that's the beautiful thing about comics, is that unlike film or television or theater, it doesn't take a stampede of people to make a work. You can sit down with a pen and paper and draw yourself some boxes and some stick figures, and you've got a comic. And so I just grew up kind of loving them, drawing them, and eventually when it came time for college, I went to a wonderful school where it was like, listen, study what you love, and I studied comics.
Well, so would you say, I hope this isn't offensive, geek culture is universal?
Oh, absolutely, and it's on the rise, people. It's pretty amazing. I'm a firm believer in the principle that when you find someone who loves what you love it that much more. Listen, there's a lot of love at a Comic-Con. They're amazing. You go and it's all these people from all sorts of different walks of life. Growing up, I was like that kid where I was, like straight A student and like always did my homework and ate my vegetables. People would be like, you read comic books? Because it just wasn't expected. And I think now we're getting to a point where I'll be on the L train, back home in New York City, and there will be this like beautiful like model woman, with her, with her whatever Michael Kors and whatever, and she'll be reading like the latest issue of Captain America, and I'm like, what happened? Like, and it's pretty amazing. I think you see it especially at a comic convention where people from all walks of life have gravitated to this medium, that they see it as a legitimate form for telling stories that they can relate to, and especially overseas, which is what this piece was all about. It's pretty amazing that people that I really have nothing in common with, and I'm so aware when I go, I'm this like, they expect an editor from Marvel Comics probably to be this like old stuffy white guy, and I show up this like bombastic gay Asian kid, but it doesn't matter, because we both remember the time that Jean Grey was consumed by the Phoenix Force, or we remember the time that Bane broke Batman's back, spoiler alert, sorry. And there's that kinship because we have, oddly enough, that shared experience. And it's kind of a beautiful thing to see that how that geek culture kind of just expands, and it crosses all other boundaries and lines, and we can share that.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned earlier that at these international conventions you have a translator. Like, how was it when you would go to these conventions? Was there always a translator there?
Well, here's the thing about Spain. Every show is very different, and oftentimes they're organized by comics people. Now, comics people typically are these, like a lot of the times artists who stay at home all day and they work by themselves and, they see no other humans as they draw their pages. So all of a sudden, they're organizing these massive shows that thousands of people turn out to. And again, it's a strange meeting of skill sets that probably shouldn't. So I never really know what to expect. And so when I went to Granada for the first time, Granada is this beautiful city in the south of Spain, it was literally the week I was supposed to leave, and I was calling the organizer and was like, is this happening? Like, is there a plane ticket? What's going on? Is there an itinerary? And he's like, yeah. You're gonna get the plane ticket in the mail, or your email. And the entire trip was like that. It was like I would get my plane ticket, so I would get on the plane, and I would arrive in Granada, and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, someone's gonna meet you at the airport to pick you up," and then it would be like, "Oh yeah, well, we're in the car. Oh yeah, we're taking you to this hotel." And the entire trip, and it was amazing because it was just sort of like fly by the seat of your pants, and at a point you just kind of, like you were saying, you're just in it, and you kind of learn some things about yourself and how you react to certain situations because it's just you and your wits out in the world. But translators, I mean, it's absolutely that. Sometimes you show up at a con. One time we had a bunch of college students who were at the local university who were part of the translation program, and they came, and there was always one of them by your side, and they translated for you all weekend. It was wonderful. Another time we had this wonderful man named Bruce who lived in Spain, and he was from the United States, so they figured, oh, he must be a great translator. Not the case. He could speak Spanish and English, but oftentimes translating on a panel, you'd be sitting there and you'd be like listening to the person like speaking in Spanish to you, and Bruce would be whispering in your ear, I don't know what they're saying. So it's a mixed bag. I mean, and that's part of the fun, and you kind of learn how to be in front of a room and wing it. Again, a skill set I never thought I would have to engage as an editor.
So do you think that there's sort of a special bond between comic fans globally, kind of like what we heard about the air guitar? Like there just seems like these sort of niche things that people do that you find that they might not have stuff in common, but then they do.
It's totally that. I was absolutely thinking that when you were saying that. And I'm sure it's applicable to so many other things. Part of it's probably because it's so, I don't know, like outside the norm. Like I said, when I was this straight A nerd kid, people would be like, you read comics, out of surprise. And I think that in some ways, I was like, well, yeah. Because it defined me in some way, it made me unique, and it was something special that I felt like, man, I get it, why don't you get it? And I think that to some degree, we all feel that way about certain interests that we have, where you feel like you're in on it, you're in on the secret, and you love it when other people are in on the secret, and you can kind of whisper to each other about the secret. Now a lot of people are in about comics, unfortunately. Not unfortunately. There was actually a piece in Business Week like just a week or two ago about how comic conventions are exploding, and not just with men, but with women, and about how they're really showing up, and they're latching onto parts of a comic convention that the male audience might not, but I think that's so wonderful that everyone is able to find sort of their part of geekdom to occupy, and that they can find something that they love and find other people and kind of congregate, and comic conventions are facilitating that. Mm-hmm.